Now that we have a basic understanding of composite functions, let's look at how to find their domain. So whenever you find the domain of a composite function, the thing to remember is that x must be in the domain of the inside function, and then the output of that must be in the domain of the outer function. So for f composed with g, so remember f composed with g of x is equal to f of g of x. So g of x is the inside function. It's acting on x first, then f is acting. So our function we have to look at first is g. So the domain of g, then the outputs there would be the range of g, but only some of those may be allowed in f. So the domain of f composed with g has to start by looking at what we can put in for g, and then what can be put in from the outputs of that into f. So what's this mean? Any x values not in the domain of g must be excluded. Then any x values that are not allowed in the domain of f should be excluded from the outputs of g. Let's look at an example. So with f composed with g of x, the thing to remember is that this is f of g of x. So we're going to first focus on the inside function. So let's look at the domain of g. So for g, notice that we have a denominator. So we're going to take x plus 1, we're going to set that equal to 0, and that's going to yield x equals negative 1. This must be excluded. We cannot allow x to be negative 1. Now, the follow-up is, what's going to be excluded from the input of f? So in this situation, our denominator is x minus 5, and we don't want then x minus 5 to be 0, so we have to exclude 5 as an input. But what's that mean? 5 is not the input for g, right? So if we go back to that picture of we have our x values, and then g is going to act, and then f is going to act. We've already said what we can't put into g. Now we're focusing on what we can't put into f. So what we can't put into f is the output of g. So this 5 is actually, even though it's an exclusion of an input of f, that means it's an exclusion of an output of g. So we don't want this to be an output of g. So what we're going to do is we're going to set g of x equal to that output. So let's find the result for that. 15 over x plus 1 equals 5. If we cross multiply, we can think of this as 5 over 1. Then we can multiply x plus 1 times 5 and 15 times 1. And we obtain 5x plus 5 equals 15. This would mean 5x equals 10 and x would equal 2. So this means that if I put in 2 as an x value, g would output 5. But we've already said that 5 can't be put into f. So 2 has to be excluded, and negative 1 has to be excluded. So the domain would be negative infinity to negative 1, union, negative 1 to 2, and then from 2 to infinity.